I'm at the launch of the brand new CX-30 from Mazda. And when you look at this, specifically the interior, it's a almost carbon copy of the new Mazda 3, which I spent so much time on doing video. If you want obsessive detail about everything, check that out. Now, in terms of the CX-30, there's some differences. They have different interior color options, and because the base price is low, there's a good mix of what you get and what you don't get depending on how much you spend. This is the premium trim level, or the highest trim level. It's all-wheel drive. You get the leather interior, and this has the parchment leather, which I talked about in other Mazda videos. If you have a family or you're really outdoorsy, don't get the white because it's already stained. It's going to be the most difficult thing to clean, but it looks amazing. If you are super anal about keeping an interior clean, this looks great. Now, it's typical new or second generation Mazda stuff. The fit and finish, the materials look good. Every single knob, button, and switch feels very high quality, and that's because they put energy and engineering into all of that to make sure that everything you interact with in here feels like a more higher end brand. And I know you hear that all the time, but this is where they're moving. Now, in terms of audio and infotainment, this has been a big change. Much like the Mazda 3, it's the same thing. There's no touch screen here. They want to remove the distraction and you interacting with the screen. So everything's done by the command knob. And based on their their study of science and psychology, they figured out that people are stupid, basically. And you can only remember a certain amount of things, so the screen only has 5 to 7 things on it at a time. Now, the thing that is the major difference between the Mazda 3, which I'm sure will get rolled out in other cars, is they've added telematics, which means it can now connect to the internet because they have a Verizon modem in here that gives you that always-on connection, which has 2 benefits. 1, you can turn on a wireless hotspot for the passengers, or 2, over-the-air updates, which is critical in modern cars. So now you don't have to depend on the dealership to get updates when and if there's bugs. All right. This is an extremely refined interior space. It is super quiet compared to the previous generation Mazdas, and I owned a previous Mazda product, their first gen, and this is where they fixed everything. Like removing the speakers out of the door. They don't have a hole cut in the sheet metal, so they moved the lower frequency driver in the footwell. And when you're driving this, like we will when we're going to show you, you literally hear nothing except for the rattle of the 4-cylinder engine. And, you know, you can tell how much energy and time they spent in this, and the fact that now it feels more open and spacious than the Mazda 3. And that was the big complaint of the Mazda 3 hatch. You felt like you were in a coffin. But I'm going to tell you something. And I've had this conversation with other people. If you're getting out of an older vehicle, a bigger SUV that's more of a bread box with more glass, this is going to take some time to get used to because your sight lines are a lot more reduced than the newer Mazda products. So if you're coming out of a bigger car, that's the first thing you're going to notice. Once you get used to it, this is one of the most driver-centric, really some of the best ergonomics of any modern, like affordable vehicle you're going to get into. But the main thing to talk about is the cargo space, so let's look at that. All right, this is the most important part about the CX-30 because if you're buying a CUV, you probably want cargo capacity, something you lose with a lot of cars, sedans, or even like the Mazda 3 hatch. That was the biggest complaint, there wasn't enough room. So this fixes that. They take the Mazda 3 platform, the body, and now they've lowered this kind of load floor area and the overall width and the mouth of the hatch area. This is taller, so you can fit more crap in it. This is a good example. This is my main suitcase. It's a 30-inch luggage that I fit things that you don't want to know about. It's absolutely disgusting what I put in here. And if you pay me $1,000, I'll open it up. But we put this in here. I can fit this without putting down the seats. And the critical part about that is I couldn't do this in the Mazda 3. And if you have a car seat in the back, the last thing you want to do is be trying to fold down seats to fit cargo. So this is a great in-between between the Mazda 3 hatch and the CX-5 because people complain the CX-5 is too big, the CX-3 is too small, and that's why this exists. Now, passenger space in the back, that's where it becomes compromised because if you have taller drivers, the second row is where this thing suffers to give you more cargo space here and in the front. So it's great for kids in the back, but again, if you're bigger, you need to test this out. I've just teleported into the shop so you can take a look at the CX-30 on the Benpack lift. And I'm not going to go into as much detail as I did on the Mazda 3 because so much of this stuff is the same, so check that out. Now, I had my chance to talk to Dave Coleman about a lot of this, and the main thing to talk about is efficiency changes. Flat mufflers, flat underbody, trying to control airflow, which also helps to reduce wind turbulence and noise and NVH, and that was the primary goal of this generation of their architecture or platforms. They want to make this a more comfortable, quiet driving experience. That was the biggest complaint about the older Mazdas. So one of the reasons they went to a torsion beam rear end is because of that. It rides better. They can spend less development time on getting the suspension right and focusing on other things that people want. Now, the torsion beam has been altered. The control arms, the bushings, the sway bars, the spring rates have all been changed from the Mazda 3, which makes sense because you're raising it up a considerable amount. And when you look at the back here, you can see how much space there is to nose around, which means you can take a better look at the differential. And Mazda's all-wheel drive system is on demand. It's an electromagnetic clutch that engages and disengages when it needs to send power to the back. But Mazda's big thing is they've tried to improve the efficiency of this system to the point where it's only affecting fuel economy by maybe 1 or 2 miles per gallon at the worst. So you're no longer having the huge penalty of having this like the older days. Now, the other things that they're trying to change here is they have a whole division in Mazda which studies human dynamics and the way the body reacts under certain G-forces, bumps, and all of that. And they're trying to limit the intrusion or the changes in body motion over certain bumps. So they've done things like softening up the tire compound on this car. They've changed bushings like the control arm bushing in the front of the car, which has less deflection than it used to. And there's all these little things that they're trying to do to make the driving experience better. And that's the whole point of this current mindset in the Mazda engineering process, specifically with the suspension. But I think that's enough of the underbody. Let's talk about the engine for a minute. Under the hood of the CX-30, you can get one engine, the 2.5-liter naturally aspirated 4-cylinder that is connected to a 6-speed torque-converted automatic. Over the course of the life cycle of this engine and trans, they've updated the shift logic to smooth out some things. And there's a few great things about this. One, there's no turbo to worry about or the complexity of all the lines and the coolant in turbocharged setups. There's no CVT or eCVT or hybridization. So when we talk about reliability, this has been a very reliable motor for Mazda. And the other part is people are like, well, it seems kind of slow. Well, in this segment, we talked about already that the bar is set so low, this is actually one of the most powerful engines in its class. So if you want the quickest CUV, this is going to be it. Now, there's two other things to talk about. Direct injection. Mazda hasn't had a ton of problems with carbon buildup, and as I've talked to Dave Coleman about a couple things, they designed this to think about how to reduce cylinder head temperatures to avoid carbon deposits baking on. Now, it's going to happen eventually. You're going to get a little bit of it here, but it hasn't been horrendous on this version of the Skyactiv engine. The second thing is they've quietly snuck in cylinder deactivation that's only available on the highest trim level 2.5 liter, which changes components in the head. So you can't, it's not just an on and off switch. You can't just add it to the lower trims. There are mechanical changes that have happened to this. And I asked him, can you turn off cylinder deactivation? The point of it is to shut down 2 cylinders to increase fuel efficiency, which is only good for about 1 mile per gallon. He said you can't disable it. And my question was, other manufacturers have had severe problems with this system, either burning oil, burning cylinder heads, or like breaking camshafts in the case of GM that they still haven't fixed. So I was worried about this, and he kind of explained the testing procedure, that they made sure that there wasn't going to be cylinder wall deformation from the heating and cooling cycles of shutting down cylinders. And what that means is you're less likely to have problems with burning oil, having problems with rings. But Mazda did have an issue with programming early on with these that were causing mechanical problems that they have fixed with just a software update. So if you're worried about it, don't buy the top level trim and go for the middle trim or the base trim like this is, and you don't even have to worry about cylinder deactivation.
So Mark, we're in California once again in a Mazda deja vu.
Yes, the Mazda CX-30 to be specific. This is the taller, more practical and usable version of the Mazda 3 hatch. They've raised it up, they've given it all the plastic body paneling, and
Excuse me, the tough plastic body paneling that adds a sporty character to this particular automobile.
yes, which I'm not going to go over with that much right now, other than to say there is a purpose for this. And when I first saw it being released, I'm like, okay, it kind of makes sense. And I'm going to tell you a story, and I'm going to tell everybody a story. My girlfriend had an obsession with the CX-5. She's like, I want it. I like the way it looks. And then when she got in it, she's like, this thing is way too big. Way too big. I'm like, well, maybe the Mazda 3 hatch will work. She got in that, she's like, this is way too small. And I feel like I'm trapped and suffocated in it because of the sight lines are reduced. So when this was announced, the CX-30, I'm like, okay, it's gonna appeal to those that want a higher ride height, better visibility, and more cargo capacity without having the big SUV feel. And that's exactly what the CX-30 is trying to accomplish.
Mazda's target demographic, at least according to the presentation we just both sat through, is young, active families and young professionals who live a active lifestyle.
Oh, interesting. Like active as in what? Going to Walmart?
Yeah,
and
Walmart, Targets, Long John Silver's, all the young hot spots you could imagine. To me, this car is basically a slightly worse driving Mazda 3 with optional all-wheel drive. That's sun stilts.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. But it does have more space, and it does feel more roomy and less claustrophobic. And we fit a monster suitcase in the back with all the camera gear, which I could not do in the Mazda 3 as easily. And I think that alone is going to make this far more popular than the 3.
And in its segment, it's not that expensive. It is priced just along like the Ford EcoSport, the Chevy Trax, the Subaru Crosstrek. It's in the right price segment, and it definitely feels, in the words of Mazda, the most premium.
Yeah, it does. This definitely, like the Mazda 3, I was super impressed with all the attention to detail in that car's interior. And this is the same exact thing, if not slightly better. They made some tweaks on the interior space, which you're not going to notice when you first look at it. But like the black plastic and all that isn't pure piano gloss black. There's some texture inside it when it's lit up. But this feels amazing, considering you can buy it between $22,000 and $30,000 fully optioned out. You know over time it's going to be less than that. I feel like this is definitely, if you have to have a crossover, which it's a car. If you have to have a crossover that's a car, the lifted car, I would definitely recommend this right off the bat because of all the things that it does so well. So let's talk about some of the driving stuff.
So I personally think this loses some of the charm of the Mazda 3. One of the reasons I love that hatchback so much, it is, at least in my opinion, the best driving of these small hatches. I think it drives better than the Corolla. I think it drives way better than the Civic does. But you lose a lot of the dynamic joy you get in that car in this.
Well, I feel like this car drives well, but it's definitely, they had some targets, and they knew that people that were going to buy this didn't want any steering feel, right? You don't want to feel anything, and you don't feel anything through the steering wheel. It's a very isolated experience. There's not a lot of road noise, which is something they fixed from previous generation Mazdas. There's like no road noise in here.
No, it's very, very quiet.
The only thing you hear is the four-cylinder. I mean, up here in the hills, or whatever you want to consider this, the mountains, canyons, it feels like a four-cylinder. I mean, it's like really stressed. It's exactly what you would expect from it. But on the regular road, yes, it's got 40 more horsepower than some of the competitors, and you will notice it. And the fact that you have a torque-converted automatic that is really responsive to manual inputs. It's pretty smart with its shift logic. It doesn't do a lot of hunting, and they've improved the programming of the transmission ECU to coordinate with the all-wheel drive system, so it's better than it used to be. And I know some people had a real big problem with the 6-speed Skyactiv Auto in the older cars, but there's a lot of those problems have gone away with this, and it was really, really enjoyable to drive. It's super smooth.
Tell me what you think about the all-wheel drive system.
Well, I got stuck in the Mazda 3 in the Tahoe National Forest like a dumbass.
I forgot about that.
You know, I got that thing beached, and it was incredible how far I got it in there before it got stuck. So it's a very usable all-wheel drive system for a car because, you know, like Dave Coleman was like, hey, you know, I don't know the specific ground clearance numbers, but you'll have to just double check before you say that. I'm like, dude, nobody gives a shit about the ground clearance on something like this. Anybody that's taking this off-road is not going to take it off-road. They're going to go
or they're
like
doing it by mistake.
Right, yeah, like me driving it into
look at you.
Right, getting it stuck somewhere. You're not buying this to go off-road, but any type of like light trails, if you're an like hiker or you go camping, yeah, it's going to do that. I mean, most all-wheel drive systems are going to do that.
And they have changed a lot of the all-wheel drive logic for this vehicle to make it understeer less and be more efficient.
It's all about, Mazda's thing is about making this feel more connected and more natural driving, so it's less distracting. They don't want you to be distracted by systems in this vehicle, and a lot of manufacturers don't really get that. And the best thing I can explain is, if you get into a competing Hyundai or Kia product, their SUVs, if you turn the wheel and mash the gas, the first thing that happens in those cars, the traction stability control literally turns off the car. If it detects any wheel slip, any type of adverse condition, it literally turns off the power. You think, did the car turn off? Mazda, the way that they do their stability systems is it progressively, it allows you slip, it allows that natural feeling that you're still controlling the car. And it's not just the stability, it's the braking, all the subsystems that make driving good is where they focus their energy. They're really good about attention to detail.
The human-machine connection for them is the most important thing. It's all they bring out all the time in all their presentations, but it's not a marketing gimmick. They really, really do care.
No, it's not something they just talk about and bullshit about. They literally have science and all the reasons why they do it, even if we don't agree with some of it. They have a clear focus of how they design their cars. A lot of manufacturers cannot either provide that information, convey it, or they just, you know, rush something out.
They are unapologetically Japanese. They really, really are dedicated in what they do. They are uncompromised in their vision, and I respect them for that, honestly.
Well, that's a good time to get into the final thoughts, Jack.
Perfect.
Final thoughts on the CX-30. Big thanks to James Orton for giving me this vehicle to make this a more complete presentation. Drew Carey, Justin, Dave Coleman, all from Mazda Corporate, for helping me out during the launch of this to gather the information needed to tell this story. Now, the CX-30 is kind of that next generation product for Mazda. That's why they're adding the 0 to it, and more than likely other models are going to have the 0 added to existing models. And I think when you look at this as a whole, the reason it exists is Mazda showed us a chart of their sales. And what it shows is the Mazda 3 sales are down. And we could all argue. We could argue it's maybe the car, maybe this, maybe that. And while we're all arguing this, including Mazda, you might be in bankruptcy if you're just blind to the fact that people are moving away from cars right now as a trend to small CUVs and SUVs. So Mazda had to react, and that's why this exists. They took the platform that the Mazda 3 was on, and they improved a lot of the things that people complained about, namely this area. This is the biggest thing. There is a lot more cargo capacity in here and usability than in the Mazda 3 hatch, and that is why you would buy this over that. And you get the raised up height a little bit, which they've also softened up the suspension. It is super quiet, and it is one of those vehicles that when you look at the class as a whole, basically everything's like the lowest common denominator, and this kind of elevates it, namely when you look at the price. This is 24 grand. You can get a decent one for about 26, and when you look at the interior space, the attention to detail, it's really, really nice from a drivability and interior usability standpoint, and it's pretty much the most powerful one in the segment, or the most powerful. The negative, and people are going to argue this to death, is the exterior. And we had this in the air, and Jack walked in and saw it, and he's like, it looks like a prosthetic limb. And I got to admit, the plastic cladding all over the side of these things is gotten to the point of disgusting. And I heard from Ken Sayward, their designer, Dave Coleman, said the same thing. Well, it's all about the unspoken design language of what it makes it look like, not painting these panels. It makes it look more off-roady, tough. It doesn't look so squished. The proportions don't look weird. But manufacturers have figured out a way to paint more panels than this. This is getting to almost Isuzu Via-Cross levels of bad, and I think they're going to have to dial it back because it just looks cheap. And I know there's a cost savings. They won't admit it. There's a cost savings not to paint all this material, but supposedly this is all for design. And I think that's my real only complaint about this, besides from, you know, the second row is a little cramped. You could make some complaints about the way certain features work, but overall you're getting, if this thing was a lot more expensive than it was, I'd have a lot more complaints. But I could really see somebody using this every day and enjoying it because it's a great in-between between a bigger vehicle like the CX-5 and the Mazda 3. And it is very, very comfortable and quiet to drive. They definitely, what they set out to do, they achieved with this. Now it's just a matter of, are people gonna buy it? I hope that helps. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next video. The front of this car, now take a look at this, guys. Take a look at this. See that? Yeah, you're seeing that right. That's number 10. 10. Okay, not 9. So if it's 10 because we have 10 fingers and toes, and that brings in the more human-centric design of the new CX-30. Let's take a look at the inside. Yeah. Wow! The Takumis were busy in here. Now I'm feeling a little bit of Jin Bai Tai, which is a combination of a horse and rider combined. So it's a horse with a human head and with a bow and arrow. So it struck me in the heart, and that's why I'm going to buy a CX-30, and you should too.
Horror.